work with the family to make this happen. I want to offer staff for making this helpful. If you haven't seen it yet, make sure that you get up there and check it out. And that will be part of our permanent military gallery exhibit, so people will be able to see that. I want to thank John Clark, who's here, the helicopter model, to be part of his work with that. And for Kelley, for involved the last couple of years to make this happen. And I'm glad that you guys are all here to see the end of this. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Kelley Neal Gray, more about her father. And I want to, you may, it's transcribing up on the screen. I think we've got a little people on Zoom. There might be a little. So we are dealing with several technology things here to be able to have Paul in the room with us. A big part of this process. So I'm sad that he, but we'll be doing this through Zoom. So I will in the slides. We have other people joining us on Zoom. So you see a lot of moving parts and trying to get sound come through. So bear with us if we have any issues that come through with that. Start sharing the slide.
So thank you, Natalie. I really, I want to thank God. I said, we've been working on this. We've had some challenges, but here we are. Let's get started. So I want to thank everyone who is both in person and online.
Sorry.
So I want to thank Paul. Tom Stafford, I believe, is here. He has written several articles in the Springfield News and Sun. I also want to thank Brianna Honeywell. You will get a program. She worked tirelessly to help put that together. As Natalie said, John Clark, who drove from Texas yesterday to bring the helicopter model. So as you can see, it's taken a lot of us to pull this together. I also want to thank, when I look out into this is when I start to tear up. I mean, the first people I see are my neighbors. So sitting in the back, I mean, thank you for coming. For those who travel near and far, and Angie's here from DC, I have people here from Florida, my colleague roommate Robin and Les, I was in their wedding, they're here from Florida. I've got my Link sisters, Circlette sisters, family, friends. I just want to thank everyone here for coming and taking out time today. I also want to thank my immediate family who's sitting right here in front. I was not alone in this. My brother Van is sitting here in the first row. He's the human I've known the longest here in this room. So I want to thank him. Our son Neil, our daughter Erica, and especially my husband Eric for your love and support. So thank you. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to break it into 3 parts. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about Dad's personal life. Then Paul is going to come on Zoom and he's going to talk about his military experience as well as the mission in Korea. And then I'll come back and talk to you about the USS George M. DB-100 and my responsibility as her sponsor. So I want to acknowledge that some of us will have to leave a little bit early. A family friend, Bonnie Eubanks, passed. And so I know some people will be slipping out a bit early to attend that funeral. So I want people to know that we are.
Just a small token. The devil is a liar. All right, so George, he was born August 29th, 1930, right here in Springfield, Ohio. So he's a hometown boy. He's was born to the parents of George Washington Neal and Marionette Edwards Neal. And unfortunately, Dad lost both of his parents at the age of 10. So he had, his father died first and then his mother passed. And once his mother passed, his siblings were all broken up into different homes. His oldest brother, James, he went to the service. He was about 7 years older than Dad. His sister that was about 1 year older than him, she was adopted or taken in by a family. And then the youngest, which was Thomas, and he was about 7 or 8 years younger than Dad, he was adopted by a family, and actually name was changed and the whole bit. But once he was, they were old enough, they came back, they got Thomas, they changed his name back to Neal, and they all kind of started migrating to the California area. So Dad had a lot of loss early in his life. He lost both. He lost his parents, then he lost his oldest brother, then he lost his youngest brother. And his youngest brother died at 44. And his oldest brother, I believe, died around 53. And then he lost his sister in 87 or 88, Harriet, and she was just 59. So as you can see, there was no longevity. And so, of course, when my mother died, our mother died at 65. So, of course, when I hit 65, I was pretty happy. And now I'm 68, so I'm not going anywhere. So the siblings, as I said, they were separated. And so Dad was actually taken in by a foster family, Emma and John Williams. And so they already had 8 children. So you can imagine with 8 children, a lot of love, but probably little else, right? He was friends with their sons, and that's how he ended up in their home. And he was really there until he went to the service. So he, went to Springfield High School. He left there at 17 and joined the Navy. So you can see up until that point, he had built a lot of resilience, right? Which would really serve him by the time he got to the service, and really all through his life. So again, I said he went to Springfield City Schools. He enlisted in the Navy before he graduated. He served for 5.5 years. He was in the Korean War, was the conflict that he was a part of. He became a prisoner of war. He was in a prison camp for 2 years. And Paul will talk a little bit more about his service, about the mission, but he was awarded a Navy Cross for that heroism. So Dad returned to Springfield after he was released, and you can see some of that memorabilia when he was released, the telegrams, as that all unfolded. Eventually, you know, he did get his diploma from Springfield South High School. When he returned, he returned and he was a mail carrier for the post office. He married our mom, Barbara Trimble, in 1954. And they divorced in 1957, so they were not married very long at all, just enough time to have Van and I. And so they spent a little bit of time in Boston, then returned back to Springfield. And once they divorced, he moved back to LA, and that's where his siblings were residing at the time. So he spent all the time from 1957, I think I was 6 months old when my mom and dad got divorced. And he spent all that time in California until the early 80s. And that was once his youngest brother passed in 81, that's when he returned to Ohio. So many of you in this room, especially if you're from Springfield and you've known me most of your life, you really only know myself, Van, and my mother. And so, you know, I'm not taking anything away from our dad or his heroics, but what you have to understand is that B.T. Neal, she was something else, okay? And I think Van and I got a lot from her. She was our hero growing up. She was our mother and our father for many years, really, until we reunited with our dad later on in life. So after returning to LA, Dad spent his career in electronics. I believe he worked for a company called Similar Electronics. He also opened up a electronic business with his brother, James, and it was called Neal Electronics, Nico. And he had a very active life in LA. I remember going to visit him when I was 16. You know, he was always dressed very sharp, always, you know, he loved water sports and animals. He raised Arabian horses. He loved all sports. He loved the stock market. I think he had 30 or 40 pairs of shoes when he passed away. So that tells you a little bit something about him. So he was a fine, well-dressed man. Now, he did play the lottery every day. I still have his lottery tickets. We did try to play them last night for the game. So you may not see us again because we may not. After losing his two brothers to death far too early, he returned to Springfield. I was in my 20s, I believe, at this time. He returned to Springfield really to grow his electronic business and to raise his Arabian horses and show them. And he did show them in Columbus. In the mid-'80s, he would return to California. He returned because that's really where his heart was. That's where he had spent most of his time. His sister still lived there. And the winters here were pretty rough, especially if you are baling hay and doing all that to care for horses. He met the love of his life, Rosemary Egan, and they lived happily for 25 years until my dad passed. He lived a good life. Rosemary, Van, and I were all there when he passed, December 1st of 2016. And we were there when he was buried with full military honors, which was very important to him at Arlington Cemetery in June of 2017. So I also want to thank those. There are several in the room that actually attended that beautiful service at Arlington. And so I want to thank you again for joining us. When you think about Dad, his life reflected resilience, dedication, and a deep love of family. But if you think about all the things that he had gone through, it had taken me a while. One of the biggest lessons that I learned from my dad was forgiveness. And because if you want relationship, sometimes you have to mourn the person or the thing or the way you wanted a person to be, right? And you have to accept them for who they are and meet them where they are. And so he taught me that. It took me a while, but he taught me that because we had a very strong relationship at the end of his life. And I am so thankful for that. But he was a veteran, a POW, a businessman. If you saw the one picture, he was a cowboy. He was a brother, a husband, a father, a grandfather, and a great-grandfather. And I hope that Cameron, his great-grandson, is watching. He overcame early loss with purpose and perseverance, remembered for his courage and compassion. He was a complex man because he was human. He was an aviation machinist mate, 3rd class. George Milton Neal. 3rd class, you can still be 1st class. And he was 1st class. He was a 1st class individual. So Natalie, can you show some of the personal slides? These are just some of my favorite photos. This is probably the youngest picture that we have of Dad. He was in boot camp. So this is when he first went to the Navy. And there's the cowboy. That's Van and I, that on one of our many visits that we went to go see him. And that's Erica Neal, 2 of his grandchildren. He did have another, Van lost his son back in 2017, Monty. That's 2 of his grandkids. And this was really shortly after Dad passed. This is his family in California. A lot of my first cousins, and then Rosemary in the front. And this is Rosemary's family. And then this is a picture of Arlington. And then there is his tombstone. Okay, so before I move on to Paul, let me give you a little bit of background about Paul. Paul is amazing, okay? He contacted me, we connected in 2021. He, as Natalie had said, he, he got in touch with me through Timothy Ayers. Of course, Timothy knows a lot of Springfield and Springfield history. And so he said, oh, I know the Neals, I can connect you. So he connected Paul and I, and we started talking. But Paul is a native of Springfield. He graduated from the Ohio State University and California State University with degrees in aeronautical and astronautical engineering, heavy duty, right? Military service, he served in the U.S. Air Force from 1968 to 1980. 1980 to 2006, he worked for Northrop Aircraft, Lockheed Martin for over 25 years as a test pilot. Then from 2006 to 2017, he worked as a consultant, as a test pilot. He published many articles, received several awards, and logged over 7,000 hours in the air in 70 different aircrafts. So he has a lot of experience. So please give a warm welcome for Paul Metz.
Thanks, Kelley. Natalie, give me my first slide. Thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. I'm going to talk about George Milton Neal's military service, just as Kelley mentioned, and give you a different perspective on the man.
Just a second, Paul. You're with us here.
Paul, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, let me get the speaker up as high as we can get it. All right, Paul.
Okay, are we coming through any better now?
It's a bit quieter, but where he can hear you.
Okay. Go ahead and give me my slide. Okay, and go to the next slide. Okay, I've got a very of John Clark, and he's there in Springfield today. John, if you could raise your hand so the folk can see you. If not for John, I probably wouldn't be here today making this talk. John is an artist and a hobbyist, and he works in what's called dioramas. A diorama, think of it as a three-dimensional picture commemorating a specific historical event. And one day, about 5 years ago, John called me up, and because he knew we had a mutual hobby of building model airplanes. And he said, hey, Paul, I'm doing a diorama on this guy in the Korean War who did a fantastic job during an attempted rescue mission. And as he laid it out to me, I began to get really wrapped up in the story. And it occurred to me that I was not fully aware until John said it, that George Milton Neal was a Springfield, Ohio native, as we've talked about already. And I was determined to find out more about this man. And I have spent the last 4 years digging out information about his story. And so the call from John was a starter. But as I got into the story, I realized that I had a closer association with Neal than just this investigative reporting I was doing. I was a combat pilot in Vietnam and flew fighters. One true axiom was that if we were shot down in enemy territory, the rescue crews with their helicopters would come and take us away from the enemy and get us back to our squadron, even if it cost them their lives. So there were close calls that we had in combat. A number of my squadron mates were shot down, and the rescue and recovery services came to rescue them. So I had a second reason to follow up with the investigation of this man. And next slide. And you'll see this picture several times. If you look at the upper left-hand side, just to give you a frame of reference, the red rectangle is around Korea, North and South Korea. The lower left rectangle is around Vietnam. So if you're familiar with that, you can see Vietnam butts against China and Korea butts against China. In the lower right-hand side, you can see a more detailed look at it. We see both North Korea and South Korea, and the dividing line, the 38th parallel. Next slide. To give you an idea of what size we're talking about, North Korea plus South Korea is not quite, but almost twice the size of Ohio. In other words, South Korea is about the size of Ohio, and North Korea is about the size of Ohio. Next slide. The helicopter was really came into being right after World War II, so there was not much experience with the vehicle. But what was unusual about a helicopter was, of course, it can fly vertically up and down and doesn't require an airport, runway, and other things we have to have for fixed-wing aircraft. And that led us to use it immediately in the Korean War and had many different uses. The aircraft was developed, the methods were developed in combat. There weren't any training schools for George Neal or the other crew members. They had to learn it on their own. And the ideas far exceeded the supply of helicopters. People found out that that's pretty handy to be able to go up and down without a runway. Some of the uses are, if you're familiar with the TV show MASH, that occurs, takes place during the Korean War. And the MASH is a real mobile army surgical hospital. It was a real thing, and it saved the lives of many people in the Korean War. The communications during the Korean War were by landline and cables, and it was found that helicopters could run cables very efficiently across the battlefield, and they were used for that, as well as mine detection in harbors. You could use them to spot mines and destroy them. Vertical development involves landing troops behind the enemy lines and attacking from the rear, something that a fixed-wing aircraft can't do. In combat, you need to resupply the troops. Usually they're out in the jungle or in rugged terrain, and the helicopter proved ideal for supporting troops. The last two are search and rescue type of missions. We'll be talking about the search and rescue for combat air crews mostly. But that was, those are just a sample of some of the ways that helicopters were dreamed up and used in the Korean War. Next slide. Here's the helicopter, or the type of helicopter that George Neal was flying from. It's called a Sikorsky SO-3S. And this is aboard an aircraft carrier, the Philippine Sea. Carriers operated out in deep water and many miles away from the shoreline. And the limitations on these early helicopters were they didn't carry much fuel and they didn't go very fast or very far. Next slide. In the non-combat role, they were used for rescue. And this is a shot of rescuing a downed pilot. Next slide, and hold it till I tell you to run it. I've got a short segment here from a movie called The Bridges of Toko-Ri. And it's loosely based around the George Neal mission. The particular sequence you're going to look at is just a pilot who's bailed out and is in the water. There's no enemy troops around him. And the actual shots of the helicopter flying are actual Navy personnel operating the aircraft. So go ahead and run the clip.
Jump in after him. I'll wait around until the Hornet sends one of its copters. He looks froze. I'll have to go down. have to ride in the rumble, sir. But I haven't got anybody here to haul you inside.
Well, you can see one of the limitations of the helicopter in this video. If you notice closely, there are three people that we're concerned with: the pilot of the helicopter, he's called a parachute jumper, the crewman who jumped into the water, and of course the pilot who's unconscious. The helicopter can only hold three people, and you've got to have somebody in the helicopter to pull in the rescue person, and we couldn't do it in this case, so they had to send a second helicopter to get the man that was in the water. So these craft were very limited, very fragile, and very frail. Next slide. Combat SAR is a different thing altogether. You have to go into enemy territory and do what you just saw, but with the enemy in and around you and sometimes actively shooting at you. It's the aircraft themselves are unarmed, and the weakness is, of course, you have to hover. And hover, you're standing still on an easy target. The helicopters were underpowered. There were no night capabilities and no weather capabilities and very little instrumentation. Limited fuel, as I already mentioned. People like George Neal wrote the book, literally wrote the book on combat SAR. And 70 years later, we're still using those same methods that they pioneered. And probably the most touching part of their mission is they had their motto is that others may live. In other words, they go into this mission knowing that they could be killed themselves, but they'll do it in the hopes that they can rescue a downed crew member. Next slide. Next slide, Natalie. It was the 3rd of July, 1951, when a call came in at 4:30 in the afternoon that a Corsair, and this is a type of aircraft it was, flown by a Marine aviator, had gone down in the Unveiled Valley in North Korea. And they asked for a combat SAR mission with the helicopters to go try to pick him up. Next slide. But I mentioned that the carriers are way out at sea and they're too far away to make rescue easily by the limitations of the Sikorsky helicopter. So they used landing ship tanks, or LSTs, from World War II, and would put one helicopter on the front of it and push close to the shoreline. You can see the shoreline in the background to reduce the time and distance required to go after the survivors. Next slide. Interestingly enough, these LSTs were World War II rejects and were all manned by Japanese personnel. Next slide. There were 4 armed Corsairs that were rendezvoused with the helicopter en route to the Unveiled Valley. The 4 Corsairs were there to beat down the enemy firepower that we brought to bear against the survivals and to protect the helicopter. So they joined up and headed inbound to North Korea. Next slide. This is a Google Maps picture of the area. The Unveiled Valley is the center of the big circle. There's a town called Wonsan, and heading south of that is a valley. I'll give you a close-up and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Next slide. This is the Unveiled Valley. It's at about sea level. It has rivers running through it, and the rivers empty into the ocean. But you notice that surrounding the Unveiled Valley are hills, 1,000 to 2,000 feet up above the valley floor. This is what the situation looks like from Google, but here's what the situation looked like to them on that day, the 3rd of July of 1951. Next slide. When they arrived over the Unveiled Valley, or where they thought the Unveiled Valley would be, they ran into a very low undercast cloud deck. Looking down, all you could see were the tops of some of those biggest mountains. So they had no way of visually working down to low altitudes with the Corsairs. So they immediately became non-available or non-effective rescue pickup. Neal and Kolsch, his pilot, discussed what they would do, and they both agreed they'd give it a try to puncture down through that cloud deck and break out in the valley below. What they didn't know was how many peaks were just below the cloud decks, and they would run into them on the descent, but they did descend. And anybody who's a pilot in the audience would know how difficult this is without instruments or without lighting. Now, the day is getting long. They took off at 4:30, and it's starting to get dim. They took the very risky descent down through the clouds and managed to pop out without hitting other terrain, and went up the valley towards the ocean, saw nothing, turned around and headed back southwest up the valley. And Neal saw the parachute and the wreckage of the Corsair, and they knew the survivor was nearby. So they came down close to the parachute and landed, and did in fact find the pilot, Captain Wilkins, Jim Wilkins. They hooked up a harness for Wilkins to get him into the helo, and Neal jumped into the back seat of the helo, and they lifted off, but they were taking heavy fire, and one round disabled the helicopter, and it came crashing down. Both Neal and Kolsch, the pilot, were not injured, but Wilkins, who was already badly burned, suffered leg injuries and could not walk. The enemy was encroaching from the hillsides. They were coming down on the rescue scene, and they quickly created a makeshift cot and picked up Wilkins and physically carried him out of the area. They spent the next 9 days evading the enemy and working their way towards the coast, where they hoped to pick up a small boat and get away from the shoreline. The video I'm going to show you will take and put more detail into the picture. Next slide. Okay, don't start it yet. This is a short video clip from a show called Navy Log. Ran from 1955 to 1958 in the U.S. under CBS. And it dramatized various historical events in the Navy history. It was quite an interesting show. One of the episodes, the 12th episode of the first season, was an episode called Pentagon Story. And it is the story of George Neal, and it's dramatized. So what you're going to see here is, first, the Navy was interested in finding out what had actually happened to the men who were taken to be prisoners of war. And they had a unit set up in the Pentagon that would research and find out the exact information, what happened. In this particular case, they're interested in finding out what happened to the Kolsch-Neal team. And they last saw them on the 3rd of July of 51, and they had no contact with them until August of 53, 2 years later. So you're going to see the scene from the Pentagon as they try valiantly to come up with firsthand reports of what happened to George Neal. And then you're going to shift to a scene with a stand-in for George Neal receiving a telegram asking for information on what had happened to them. And the rest of it is a dramatization of what had actually happened during their captivity and subsequent release. So go ahead and run the video.
That would be Neal. Doggone it, where is that sailor?
We certainly could use him.
Hearsay. Hearsay. The closest thing we got to an eyewitness, and he lost him at the village.
But up to then, sir. Commander Roberts' office. Just a minute, please. Intelligence, sir.
Yes, sir. How's the cloak and dagger department? Go ahead. Terrific. Thank you very much. Neal's moved. Chief, get another wire out. Here's the address in Boston.
Yes, sir.
We would greatly appreciate all of the information you can supply. Thank you. Commander L.C. Roberts, Special Assistant to the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Personnel and Reserve Forces. Dear sir, since you ask about my lieutenant, I'll try to make my letter concise and to the point. While I destroyed what I had time to on both planes, my lieutenant took care of our downed pilot. My lieutenant said we would head over the hills to the sea so as to spot planes better.
We're here! Here!
Look, fellas. Two's company.
Oh, I don't know, sir. I always did like crowds.
Easy does it.
For about 5 days, carrying and dragging, we brought our downed pilot along. We lived on berries and acorns mostly, and what water we could find.
You fellas better leave me. You'll never make the sea with me hanging around your necks.
We don't buy that kind of talk. Now, come on, Jim. Drink up.
Six days later, July 10th, we reached the coast. But there was a village between us and the shore. Our downed pilot was suffering very badly from exposure, and we were without remedial facilities of any kind. Mr. Kelch made up his mind to scout the village for help. He said if he did not come back, to go on just the same if I could.
20 minutes later, we were all captured. Captain Wilkins, our downed pilot, was removed. I never saw him again. We were kept in a cave for 2 days with no food. Then at last, our captors came to us. We were marched under heavy and cruel guard to prison camp Pyongyang. Mostly United States Army officers and Air Force. We were kept there.
And in no time, we were in the same condition as the others, with different diseases and the lack of essentials. We lived in this indescribable hell for a month and were moved north. After the march to another camp, where I spent the rest of the war, we were parted.
Of his further life and death, there is nothing more I can say, for I was not present when he died. Hoping these details will assist you and Mrs. Kelsch, I remain sincerely yours, G. M. Neal.
Sir, there's a British officer on a mission in the building. I heard someone say he was in that northern camp.
Get him, Chief.
Yes, sir.
I'm going into the secretary with this. At least I can put Neal in for an award.
Next slide. The conditions of captivity were horrible, to say the least. As been mentioned a couple of times, he spent just over 2 years in captivity. He lost about 60% of his weight, from 175 pounds to 100 pounds. The Korean prison guards were particularly notorious about just letting the men die. They had no medical care, and cholera, dysentery, and other diseases, and regular beatings were part of the survival that had to be overcome. The Koreans were more than happy to just starve the POWs to death until the Chinese entered the war, and the Chinese told them that no, you got to keep them alive because they're bargaining chips when the time comes to negotiate. So the Chinese showed the Koreans how to properly feed them by feeding them rice with worms and weevils in it for protein. They considered that lenient treatment. They only had one set of clothing, and no hygiene, and which is standard continuous propaganda broadcasts in the POW compound to demoralize you. Next slide. When the war ended, it was an armistice, and there was an agreement made to swap prisoners. There were about 27,000 North Korean prisoners. There were 13,000 United Nations prisoners, and there were 3,600 American prisoners. And the swap occurred at Freedom Village. Next slide. A makeshift arrangement for housing the thousands of prisoners and as they were being exchanged. Next slide. At the time, there was actually quite a bit of publicity, particularly what's called Big Switch, the actual exchanging of prisoners. And this particular shot of George taking communion was widely distributed. It's a Department of the Air Force, Department of the Navy picture, but it was used in many publications of the time. Next. And as soon as he got the first chance, he sent a telex back to his foster parents in Springfield. Next slide. And just go ahead and build on this one. There were many articles and magazines and newsprint that were made during this time. His story was well known. Next. There's a additional picture of him eating ice cream that was also widely published. So George Neal himself was center of attention for many publications. This is Jim Wilkins, the Corsair pilot that was badly burned and had his legs beat up when the helicopter crashed. They had a reunion after the war. It was Wilkins who pushed hardest to give George the Navy Cross. And they kept in contact throughout the rest of their lives. Next slide. The ceremony for the awarding of the cross, the Navy Cross, was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It was a formal ceremony with military and civilians attending. Next slide. I think this is in the packet of information that the museum has put together. This is the actual citation for the Navy Cross from the President of the United States. And it's quite a statement because the Navy Cross is the second highest award for valor in combat. It's no small feat to achieve that. Next slide. Well, as I mentioned, there have been adaptations of the story. The Bridges of Toko-Ri was based on a James Michener novel, and it loosely follows the storyline of Kelch and Neal. And then, of course, you've seen a segment of the Pentagon story. You can get those, the full thing on YouTube. It should still be on YouTube. If you want to see the complete session called The Pentagon Story. Next slide. And this is just a list of some of the major articles. There's some very well done historical papers that were done. Next slide. It's been 70 years since George Milton Neal carried out his rescue effort. And a lot has changed, but the CSAR mission has only increased in complexity and capability. 20 years after the Korean episode, we were in Vietnam and we had bigger helicopters that were affectionately named Jolly Green Giants. And 20 years after that was Desert Storm with even bigger, more powerful helicopters. And today, the great-great-grandson of the squadron of George Neal is HS-2 at Norfolk, Virginia, and they're flying an HH-60 helicopter. Build slide next. And the other constant is, their motto remains to be that others may live. All right, I think that's all we'll have time for today. Sending it back to Kelley.
Make sure that they can hear you.
Okay. And now, testing. Testing. Sorry, some of the technical things. We gotta have this speaker here, Paul. But I gotta try it hard. You want to try it? be okay? Okay, thank you. That's okay. This part of the program, we're going to talk about the ship itself. So as the sponsor of the USS George M. Neal DDG 131, we got some beeping going on. Is that you, Mr. Channels, back there? So first, I would like to say that I was chosen to be the sponsor of Dad's ship by his wife, Rosemary, if she was unable to do so. She was the original sponsor. Unfortunately, she passed in 2023. And her son, Rich, recently passed in August of this year. So God bless them and their family. Rich was able actually to join us, Eric and I, when we went to the keel-laying ceremony in Pascagoula, Mississippi. As a sponsor of the USS George M. Neal DDG 131, I am the personal connection between the ship, its crew, and our father's legacy. So I don't take that honor lightly. In Navy tradition, the sponsor is said to bring the ship to life through ceremony with the same spirit of courage, humility, and faith that Dad lived by. I plan to represent the heart of Dad's story, ensuring that his sacrifice and character remain visible to every sailor who walks the deck. My goal is to create a connection between family and fleet, linking the community, the shipyard, and the Navy family who will serve abroad. And that really starts right here today in his hometown with you. Many have asked how Dad was chosen to be honored to have a ship in his name. We really don't know for sure. I do know that my stepbrother, Rich, petitioned the Navy to give Dad a Purple Heart. That didn't happen, but look what we got. We got a ship. The USS George M. Neal DDG 131 is a Flight 3 Arleigh Burke class guided missile destroyer. It was named after him, as I told you, that he was a third class machinist, aviation machinist. He was a hero, a Navy Cross recipient, and you know, don't let class stop your greatness, okay? So built by Huntington Ingalls Industries, Ingalls Shipbuilding in Pascagoula, Mississippi. The shipbuilders, they will actually hold on to the ship, build the ship, and then they still own the ship until the Navy takes ownership of it when it's complete. It was funny when Eric and Rich and I went to Pascagoula in December of 23 to the keel-laying. The Navy was, you know, they were bantering back and forth. Well, you don't even own the ship yet, you know. So it's funny when there is a distinct ownership of the ship. It represents the next generation air and missile defense capabilities for the U.S. Navy. The key construction milestones. So we got word in March of 2019 that the Secretary of Navy, and you saw a little bit of that depiction, that Dad was going to be honored with a ship in his name. The fabrication really began in 2021. COVID slowed things down a little bit. In 2020, December 15th of 2023, the keel-laying ceremony took place. And as a sponsor, I was able to weld my initials in the keel plate, symbolizing the ship's official start. And there is a replica of that over there. So my initials will actually be on the ship. My husband, Eric, and I, as I said, and Rich, we took part in that ceremony, and they were just so gracious to us. You can start flipping through some of those slides if you don't mind, Natalie. So this is all taking place at the, I mean, it was a pretty big ceremony. The shipbuilders were really happy to see an African American. There were a lot of African Americans that actually worked at the shipbuilder. So they treated us pretty royally while we were there. So the next, right now, from my understanding, talking to Ingalls just a few weeks ago, we're about 75% complete. The christening is currently tentatively scheduled. That's a picture of Rich, Eric, and myself. The christening will be spring of 2026, and it's the formal ceremony when the ship will actually get its name, and you are all invited. And we do, you know, I get to break the champagne, you know, over the bow. So we're really, our family is very excited for that. The commissioning is TBD. Sometimes that happens quickly. Sometimes that happens, you know, a year or two after the christening, and that's when it actually joins the fleet. And it's ready to serve and uphold the legacy of George Neal. So we're not sure exactly when that happens. I will actually be the sponsor of the ship until the ship is actually decommissioned. So once you are the sponsor, you're always the sponsor. I will meet the crew that will first actually go out on the ship. So there's a lot of more fun coming. And so at this time, I'd like to ask my brother to come up. Van, that is you, right? Yeah. Okay. And I think he has a couple words he wants to share before we close.
I just want to thank everybody for showing up, and I know my dad's looking down and I'm very happy.
And I would like to thank everyone for celebrating the life and the legacy of George Milton Neal. Please take some time to explore this beautiful heritage center. There is so much history here, especially if you're from Springfield. And if you haven't seen the exhibit, it's on the second floor in the military gallery. And that, as Natalie had said, that will be up, you know, to an undetermined amount. We have donated all the memorabilia to the Heritage Center. These are some of the last photos that we received of the ship. So it's definitely well on its way. The other thing that I would like to say is, I know Michael Carter is in the audience. Eric and I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to visit the Michael and Debbie Carter Center for American History, Our American Journey. And it's at St. Clair Community College. So if you get a chance to go to Dayton, that is a well worth trip. It is an amazing exhibit. He has over 1,500 or so items. And, you know, as African Americans, our history is at jeopardy. So this day is very important. Michael's exhibit is very, very important. He has things from Ku Klux Klan robes to, I mean, all kind of sports memorabilia, history, military. It's really the gamut. So it's really worth a look. And I want to thank everybody for coming today. If you have any questions, I'm willing to take questions. Yeah, I may not know the answers. I'll Google it. Anything? All right. And if you are a veteran, if you could meet us out in the front, we'll make sure that you get a coin. And I'd like to actually get a picture of you with Dad. I would really appreciate it.